sorry, Mrs. Hernandez, when you're ready, let me know.
I'm sorry. I'm ready.
I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is a work session for the Silver Consolidated School District Board of Education. It's Monday, January 21st, 2019, and it is 5:36 p.m. Mrs. Hernandez, if you could conduct a roll call for us.
Mr. McMillan?
Here.
Mrs. Montenegro?
Here.
Mr. Khan?
Here.
Dr. Diaz? Mr. Flores?
Here. Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank Mrs. Flores and her class, the food class at Silver Heights, for again preparing the food for us for our work session, for our regular meeting. It's greatly appreciated. So please let the record show that we're thanks for the food, the snacks, the dinner. Mr. Flores, if you would also pass along our appreciation. Certainly. The only thing on our agenda for our work session this evening is identify district goals, and I didn't get a chance to visit with Mr. Brown about how we would proceed. And I don't know if you had anything in particular, Mr. Brown, that you wanted to speak about. I did have the latest report card for the district uploaded, I think, to the board book. So everybody, if you hadn't seen that before, should be in your board book as well. Anything that you, in particular, Mr. Brown, wanted to speak to or about, and if not, I've got a...
No, not at this time. The administration and I have gone over and reviewed this information, and we have some, as well as our instructional coach coordinator, and so we have some general ideas about what we need to be doing at the school levels.
Mm-hmm. And what I was thinking, we had the presentation last month during our work session regarding some kind of more, I think, academic type goals. What I wanted to visit with the board and have a discussion with the board on is kind of take a step back and say, okay, we want to have some goals as a board. These typically are pretty, what I would think, broad areas, and then have maybe a couple, one or two, maybe three specific items underneath each broad area. One of the areas being academic. And as I mentioned, we had some presentations about some, academic kind of goals and measures that we're looking at as a district. But another area or two, one I was thinking was finance. If we identify these, maybe we could call them pillars, or you could call them, I don't know what another term would be as a pillar. We'd have the academic pillar, and we'd have some academic goals underneath that. We'd have the finance pillar. We'd have some goals under that. And it may be for, I'm thinking for finance, it's one is maybe we have a goal of our operational budget being, our salaries being 88% of our operational budget. And I believe last month we were at that or close to it. And so maybe looking at the state, and I don't remember from LFC meeting, they talked about what the state average is or recommendation is. Maybe that would be a goal under finance, the pillar of finance. One of the other areas I was thinking would be a pillar would be extracurricular. So all of our extracurricular programs, maybe a couple goals under that pillar. So, Mr. Brown, members of the board, while I choke on my food, feel free to chime in. And, any other ideas on maybe a broad area, like I said, academic, I was thinking, extracurricular, finance. Any other ideas?
Mr. President, so correct me if I'm wrong, so obviously these are goals for the district, not just the board itself, is that correct, or are they both?
It would, I think would be both. Another pillar I was thinking would be board. The board pillars, and there, I mean, it's, one of our goals would probably be that every member achieve 5 of the continuing education credits, which we all had in this 2017-18 school year, but we maintain that unless the board says, hey, you know what, the 5 is a minimum, let's shoot for 8 or let's shoot for 10. You know, let's try and attend more of the, and just, instead of just the region meetings,
Right,
let's try and attend some of the state.
so they can be both,
Mhm.
goals for us and the districts.
Mhm.
And are we looking at maybe 3, maybe 4 goals?
Yep.
That's what it typically is, correct?
Mhm.
That would be recommended.
I think so.
I could tell the 2 people that walked in, please help yourself to a plate of food. Mr. Barrett, I know you could eat 1 plate.
I think I can spare a few.
Okay.
Plus my wife's got dinner ready, so
All
I
right.
can't.
All right, I understand.
Well, I think for academics, some of those have already been, those were set partially, and then how Mr. Brown is really trying to push for all the schools having a B. I think a lot of things are going to change. I don't know if we'll still have A's through F's as a grading scale, but obviously he wants something above average,
Exactly.
That's something I had in my notes was B grades as well. And as you mentioned, that's gonna probably be changing to some degree, but I'm sure there'll be another methodology that we can look at and adopt.
Mr. President, I mean, as for me, and I know we're busy, I know we have a life, and I would like to see the goal go from maybe the minimum of 5 credits, like you said, to about 8. 8 credits, so sort of gives us an incentive to attend maybe a couple of state trainings besides just the region training. And it looks good on us when there's more than just one board member at one of these trainings.
Is 88%, is that the number that we're trying to get for our salaries?
Yes.
Does that sound right?
We're trying to get as close to 85 as possible.
Close to 85.
Currently, we're about 88.
So we could, would a 85% be a fair or realistic goal?
85 to 86 probably.
I mean, I think that's, I had one pillar as staffing, but I kind of see finance and staffing and maybe could all be under kind of one pillar.
Staffing directly impacts financing, so.
But that wasn't in my notes. And just what I was thinking is, instead of having those separate, have them together, and as you mentioned, the staffing is gonna impact finance. It's the largest impact to our finances, so maybe having a goal of 85, the ratio of 85% to our operational budget.
And then our cash carryover, we always want it to be around 4%, right?
And
Isn't
that's
that,
state, that's set by the state, so
yeah.
that's a healthy place to be.
And that would be another thing we could look at as a board and say, hey, the state wants us at 4%, is that realistic? Do we want to stick with the 4%? Do we want to stick with 5 or 6? So that's something else I had on as a goal.
For academic, did you have graduation rates or anything like that?
At graduation, attendance would be another one, and I think our attendance is been in the 90s for the most part overall. But maybe asking each, maybe we could say we'd like each school to try and increase that by 2% or so we bump that up as well.
What would we do for keeping our enrollment numbers up? I know we can't help what happens economically, but I know every year there's a drop in enrollment, and all these goals that are going to be put on pillars does affect that. But economic, we can't really
Control.
So that's the hard part of that one. So, and then second, Mr. President, how are we going to monitor? Are we gonna look at this and visit this every once a month, or to make sure goals are being met? If we look at this,
It's a good question. Maybe once a quarter.
See if any progress is being made.
What do you think? Does once a quarter sound?
Some of them, we won't be able to have reporting on once a quarter, so like the grades is only gonna come out annually. But we could revisit the, budget and those types of things come out, monthly. I guess we can all report on how we're doing on our continuing education. Attendance, we talk about that, pretty regularly. What were you thinking extracurricular wise?
That's a good question. I don't know. We've got the NMAA is got the Athletic Directors Cup Award, and I believe that's both activities and athletics. But I don't know. I'll throw that out there for discussion.
I think an extracurricular program has kids that remain involved like throughout their career and are encouraged by it. I mean, I think that's, that really, I think, tells you if we're doing well. If we have kids that stay in it and are and some kids' interests change, so you can't base it all on that. But I feel like if you can keep kids that, really love the sport and they can get all the way through 6th or 7th through 12th, I really feel like that's success. Because somehow you've been able to encourage them to continue to be disciplined and show up for practices and still love the sport. It's going to be hard to, it's kind of like a graduation rate thing. It's going to be hard to put numbers to it and follow that through, but I think it's more than championships and, coaches coaching forever, although that's part of it. I think really the overall development of the student athlete should be at the top of what we're about.
Mr. President, we do have the annual NMAA reporting numbers we have to do for total numbers in each program. That could be a baseline to start the year-end report, and then we can look at overall participation rates by sport, by grade level, because that is a mandatory NMA report that Victor will have to submit, as well as Mr. Allison out at Cliff for each of our schools. Middle school's not required to do it because they're not technically underneath NMAA, but we could have the format of the NMAA report and use that for our middle school participation levels too. So that'd be a pretty easy one. And then if you want to look at longevity, I think one of the things you could look at would be those number of letters earned in a program, because that shows longevity. And we do the sports banquets every year, and they do those types of things and recognize 3-year letter winners. So I don't think that would be too much of a burden. We could just ask them to submit numbers of those that have been there 3 years, 4 years, so forth with those programs. Because we do have some 8th graders that do compete up with those sports. So there could potentially be a 5-year letter winner in some of the sports that we have. So I think that would be a reasonable way to look at it. And I agree with you, seeing that longevity. It's also a career readiness indicator for kids based on longevity, persistence, and all those things that we look at for students.
Yeah.
Mr. President, I would maybe, as, I don't know if we're on the same line, but maybe increasing or maintaining our numbers with dual credit, you know, maybe more education on how easy it is to go to attend classes at Western while you're at the high school, maybe get your gen ed. Because some schools, and I talked to my wife's classroom at one point, some students don't even know what gen ed is, the general education requirements. So I think if they're educated, like when you go to college, this is what you need to get done, everybody across the board. And if we can help you get it done while at Silver High, that just maybe encourages them to keep going to college and get that college degree.
Welcome, Dr. Diaz.
Thank you, sorry for my tardiness.
Mr. Flores, I think you're on, I think that maybe would fall under maybe the academic pillar as far as dual enrollment. And the other thing that we've talked a lot about was CTE, you know, that being maybe a goal there. And I don't know if we're getting too much under the academic sector, but you know, looking at dual enrollment, looking at our CTE program and how we develop and grow that. Dr. Diaz, we're just talking about board goals and just having a discussion about identifying maybe broad areas that we would call maybe pillars like academic, extracurricular, financial, and what kind of goals we would want to maybe identify under each of those pillars to kind of shoot for. Also maybe have the pillar, a board pillar. And we talked about having, right now the minimum for board members is 5 continuing education credits. But we had talked about maybe let's try and maybe shoot for 8. And
That would be a good goal.
instead of just the minimum. You know, also under the board, I could see us maybe saying that, hey, we want to look at our board policies at least once a year and make sure that they're in alignment with, I guess, they're current and in alignment with our district goals or objectives as well.
I just to touch on that, and we can get into meat and potatoes later, but I had started looking through some of those policies, but what I was finding, because I was trying to look for consistency as far as how we deal with situations, and the policies seem really like, I don't want this to sound like they're not useful, but they were very generalized in the sense that they're kind of this huge framework with no real specifics. It's kind of the lawyer version of like, you know, say I was giving a medical consent, I can print you out the lawyer version, then I can print you out what the practical pieces to how it actually is used in an operational fashion. And that kind of seemed to be the difference between the policy piece and the, you know, say the handbook is a good example. That doesn't mean they shouldn't correlate, I agree. I mean, I think that part is very true. But I kind of found them to be fairly
Generic.
generic is a good word. There, thank you, Michelle. And rightfully so, because I think part of that is if you make too many specifications, then you're bound by it, and there's no room for interpretation with specific situations, because every situation is different. So I think it's a good idea to look at that, but when I had started looking at that in the past, that's one thing that I did notice.
Any other thoughts on pillars that we would identify and maybe some goal under each?
Could we possibly, as we revisit these once every quarter, just go in and can we add some as like a sub-pillar if we, as needed? As they're presented to us, and
I think that would be appropriate.
No reason, sure.
One other piece, and I don't know where what it would fall under, would be the community dialogue meetings. I think those are very important, and and I don't know what that would fall under, what pillar that would fall under, but I think it's important to have that, I guess, communication piece with the community, the workforce, higher education. Could be something maybe just under the board.
Yeah.
Board community relations
Mm-hmm.
could be a possibility.
Yeah, and it could be part of that piece.
Wide open. That one.
I'll open the floor for any other discussion.
So I think we just work on this monthly, start with what we have as kind of like a rough draft and start penciling in things. But like we all said, I don't think more than 2 or 3, maybe there was a number of 5. That seems like a lot if we have 5 pillars and then 5 goals. That's a total of 25 goals. That's a lot. And some of them are already set, how we talked about the B grades and the salaries and the cash carryover, NMAA participation report. Some of those things are already there. But I've just been looking at, they all talk about New Year's resolutions and you have all these goals, and if you set a bunch that are unattainable, then you just feel defeated. And so I would just really tell us, let's get something that's going to be attainable so we can reach it. And then once we've reached it, let's shoot for the next star, say, for example, so that we all feel like we're moving in the right direction in a positive way together.
I would agree, that sounds good. Other thoughts?
No, sir.
Members of the board?
So are we gonna move our credits to 5 to 8, or we're still gonna be talking about that
So it's just a
goal
goal.
for right now?
What's required by the state is
Is
5.
5.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I would say is we would probably need one more, maybe work session or meeting or something to discuss and agree upon the pillars and the goals. And then once, it could be in maybe the same meeting, have a work session, then in the regular meeting, have formal action to say as a board, these are the goals that have identified that we're gonna be trying to attain.
So they would be
Does that sound
board
reasonable?
action for approval? Okay.
And I guess they could use some refining.
Funding?
Refining.
Oh, refining, yes. I thought you said funding. I'm
Yeah,
like,
that too. No, I'm just-
That's always.
That's on the list
We'll
of
take
goals.
that too.
That should be a pillar.
Identify the pillars, the goals, a couple of goals under each, and then say, hey, every quarter, we're gonna be looking at these. And, in a quarter or two, we might say, hey, you know what? We need to modify this, or we need to change it just a little bit, or add one or subtract one. It'll be kind of, I guess, a document in motion, so to speak.
Living document.
That's it.
Yeah, and obviously administration and everyone else put your feedback, because if it's something that feels unattainable, we don't want to feel like we're part of the team. We don't want to feel like we're the dictators. So.
I can bring some ideas on the dual enrollment because we are meeting with Western New Mexico on the 23rd by departments, taking 5 teachers, Mr. Coker and myself, over to start looking at some programming. So hopefully by then we have a clearer picture of dual enrollment programs, maybe be able to offer, and I can forward that to the board after that meeting.
Great.
Sounds good. Anything else, Mr. Brown?
No, sir.
Very well, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our work session.
So moved.
Got a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll adjourn and just take